Hello everyone, I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One on One. We've seen it recently in both Texas and Florida. Interstates packed with people trying to escape the oncoming major hurricane. But if you look in the other lane, there are people driving toward the storm. One of them is usually Mark Sudduth. Mark has navigated his specially outfitted SUV toward more than 20 hurricanes. Doesn't matter if they're Cat 1 or Cat 5, and he's done it since founding HurricaneTrack.com. His technology now, though, allows you to go along for the ride. Mark says his work is more than just getting great video. It's getting the right video to save lives and educate people about hurricanes. To get it, though, he does have to be one of the few that drives toward the eye of the storm.
It's like being in a movie, but it's real. And when I'm going down, it's usually early enough that they're not sure where to stage yet. So it's usually just me and the occasional news sat truck or something. But Irma was a great example. And for this year, last year it was Matthew, that the southbound lane of I-95 in Florida was just empty. And in the northbound lane, just as far as the eye could see. And it's both humbling, like, you know, you're in another major event is coming up that I'm privileged to be able to go witness, but also empathize, as I've learned over the years, that these people, that is the most stressful thing outside of some horrible sudden accident in their life that they're going to go through. You know what I mean? The death in the family or loss of a job, those are unpredictable. The hurricane comes, it's unpredictable, but there's that lead up. And it has got to be dreadful to have to evacuate like that. And so I see it, and it's very, you know, there's hardly a word to describe it, but I do empathize, and I realize that some of those people are going to go back home to nothing.
Is there any fear in it at all for you?
Not anymore, because we use so much technology to study and to see and to hear that my fear, honestly, is my vehicle going to break down? Because I'm driving the same vehicle that was in these hurricanes from, you know, when some people that I know who are in meteorology now were still in high school.
Yeah.
And so the Tahoe has almost 500,000 miles.
Yeah.
And, you know, thanks to people chipping in and helping to keep it going, it has.
Yeah.
But if being honest about it, that's my fear. Will the vehicle break down? And it's not even for my safety. It's like, then I'll miss everything, and it's a failure. I fear running out of gas, stuff like that, but you come prepared.
And if people have seen your Katrina DVD, as you're on the hotel balcony or hallway, whatever you want to call it, it looks like the Tahoe is almost leaning, like you may have gotten a flat tire there.
Right.
And it looks like you're getting ready at that point in time to lose that Tahoe. For those of you who haven't seen it, we'll talk a little bit about this. Mark has released DVD compilations of going into storms.
Documentaries. That's right.
Yeah. And in the Katrina one, you can see the Tahoe, and it's taken a beating, and it actually looks like it's leaning during the worst of that.
And in the worst of that, the anemometer that's mounted on the back recorded a 1-second gust of 137 miles per hour. And now the Chevy Tahoe is a heavy vehicle, and you learn how to position it. A lot of people pulled up as close as they could to the hotel. There was a ring of them around there, Best Western and a Hampton Inn, and I knew not to do that because stuff, unless you're in a super typhoon or an Andrew, usually doesn't just fly through the air horizontally that's normally weighted down. Sheet metal and other things will, of course, but the heavy stuff is going to roll off of these roofs and then fall.
Right.
And there were several highway patrol cars and utility trucks, and they were crushed. And I thought, I'm going to take my chances out in the open parking lot. And the Tahoe weighs whatever it does. It's an SUV, and it had fuel in it and other stuff. So it's heavy, and hopefully it won't flip over or get the glass broken.
But you also, if I was judging correctly, as you're looking at that DVD, the wind is blowing left to right, and you parked the Tahoe back to front,
right,
almost horizontally with the wind rather than vertically, so it really can't lift it up and flip it over another vehicle. Another trick you learned, I guess, through the years.
Yes, I learned that from some of the people from the National Hurricane Center. And that was more about how to measure the wind than to keep the Tahoe from having an issue. That having the anemometer on the back corner, and if I'm facing the wind, though it's going to come over the Tahoe. You've seen, video where they have the streamline of vehicles, the aerodynamics, and it's going to create a little bit of a turbulence effect. And so to turn it around so that the rear end of the Tahoe, where the anemometer is getting the wind first and foremost, was the reason.
Yeah.
And just turned out.
The benefit, though, was having the Tahoe parked the way it did. Yeah.
It was. So I'm doing it for the science, and it happened to keep the vehicle safe, because it's very easy if someone is running to come over and knock them down. We see that in football every Sunday and on Monday Night Football, right? But it's very difficult, much more difficult to knock somebody down that's ready for you, standing their ground.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of rules. We don't drive at any speeds close to highway speed in hurricane force winds, if at all, and try to park the vehicle so that it is lined up with the wind, usually with the rear end facing the wind if it's parked.
You graduated from UNCW in 1995. I think we met in the parking lot of the convention center during the superstorm in March of 93.
93, right.
You were doing a wedding.
Right.
For those of you who don't know, March of 93, during the ACC basketball tournament, there was what they called a superstorm, which would have approached hurricane status had it been classified during hurricane season. And it hit on a Saturday. And I was out with a young reporter because I was working, because the storm was coming up. And we were looking for video opportunities downtown, and we saw a truck coming down the street, asked you to roll your window down, and your quote to me, and I'll never forget this, Mark, you said, "At least I got the bridal dance in before they had to leave."
That's a great memory.
Yeah, that was 1993 when we first met.
Wow.
You have gone on since then to graduate from UNCW with a geography degree. How did you get into the whole starting with the hurricanes and the science of it all? Because from a geography degree is one thing. You started with surge maps. Right. But how'd you get into the hurricane side?
Well, I grew up in New Bern.
Right.
And that's pretty much the answer, because living on the coast like that, and we would go down to Emerald Isle, Atlantic Beach, as my family when I was a child. And Jay Barnes ran the aquarium at Pine Knoll Shores for years. Yeah. And in August of each year, they would have a Hurricane Awareness Week. And they would show this movie, literally on reel-to-reel film, 16 millimeter probably, called A Lady Called Camille, about Hurricane Camille, a civil defense documentary put out after Camille. And it was that old narration, and the music was real cheesy but kind of scary, like it was a B movie.
Sure.
But it was real, and it was legendary, and it was like a movie, but yet it was a real story. And that, and the whole idea of the graveyard of the Atlantic, and all of our hurricane history in North Carolina, that maybe, just maybe, the lost colony took off when they weren't lost at all. They evacuated and they put on the tree Croatoan because that's where we're going. There is a theory. Yeah. And certainly the early settlers had to deal with hurricanes, and the Native Americans. So that history baked into North Carolina's coast, you can't help to be at least moved by it, if not grow up and do something about it. And some people go on to be meteorologists and get into television, and some maybe become a scientist and they work somewhere in geology, oceanography, marine sciences. Or me, I went into geography. I was actually a music major first, because music was, as a teenager, I thought I was going to be, the next Phil Collins or something. And didn't we all, right, at some point?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And it just, they don't teach you that necessarily at UNC Wilmington. You get a great degree in music, but, maybe Juilliard or somewhere else. But if I had been born 10 years earlier, it might have been a different story.
Sure.
And I realized that it was the other way around, that meteorology and geography and hurricanes was what I need to focus on, and music would be my hobby. And so I switched degree programs, and I killed it. Yeah. I did so well, and I got to focus, like you do in music, on an instrument. I was able to focus on hurricanes and climatology, some meteorology, and a lot of statistics. So geography was the way to go. And as soon as I got out, that's a terrible way to put it. Yeah. It sounds like prison. As soon as I graduated, I went to work for the Wilmington Industrial Development as an intern. the Committee of 100.
Yeah.
And the guy that hired me said he needed a report to get businesses to come to Wilmington and invest and build here. And we need to show them that we don't have a hurricane problem. And so I did this research, and my report was just the opposite. And he didn't like that too much, but it was the truth. And I realized that a lot of people probably don't know this in the everyday life of how everything's run. And I worked with Dan Summers at the New Hanover County Emergency
Dan,
Management.
Yeah. He's now in Florida, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I just realized there was a need for a really different way of approaching hurricane preparedness and information. And so I started doing these large poster-sized maps instead of the 8.5 by 11. Treat it like a movie, like it's a big deal, because it is, and really hit people over the head with a sledgehammer without being sensational and hyperbolic, and get their attention through new graphics instead of the old cartoon stuff. And so as time wore on, that's exactly what I did. And now we got hit by hurricanes coincidentally.
During that time, right, yeah.
So on the one hand, what a fortunate time for me to start my career.
Yeah.
That's kind of a strange way to put it, but it's, had I done it anywhere else.
Sure.
Yeah, I was right here in Wilmington, and we had basically 5 from 96 through 99.
Yeah,
and the
2
rest
big
is
ones.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, and you developed a relationship at Lowe's, kind of backed you, didn't they? And
yes.
then, but how did you get from that into actually going into you launched the website in 99, so or Hurricane Track in 99, so there's a time frame in there that you had to be doing some other things and kind of ramping up to this.
So the idea of what people think of as hurricane chasing, people have done that ever since there was video cameras.
Yeah.
And there were a few legendary people that I knew of growing up. And of course it's extremely frowned upon by the officials, but behind closed doors they appreciate the footage. And so the old way, through the first probably half of my career, you had to drive out into it and film it with your video camera. And you would bring it back, and you would either sell the footage to the networks, or you could post it on a DVD. There was no YouTube yet, and anything like that. And so that's what I did early on. Even the ones that hit here, Fran and Bertha, Bonnie, Dennis, Floyd, all of those, I was in a vehicle, and I had to actually drive out into it. But I was very careful. It was never anything reckless, or I mean, somebody has to do it, is the way I looked at it. And I really wanted to gather the scientific part of it too. So we gathered wind data with a vehicle-mounted anemometer, pressure data, and then knowing what to videotape. That I wasn't wanting to be out there to get the money shot and to be famous for that. I wanted to be, if I was going to be famous, I wanted to be famous for my body of work, the data.
Contribution to education more than anything else?
That I could really do more with that than make a quick buck filming someone's house being destroyed. That's not going to help necessarily. And so little things like learning to film the highest part of the surge during Floyd. I was on Greensboro Street at Wrightsville Beach, and the surge is coming in and everything's filling up, and to be able to film it just right at the peak of the eye, and then take it to the Army Corps of Engineers, and we went out and we took a survey, and we knew exactly how high the storm surge was. There was no approximation. We could take the still frame from the video and literally go out and match it up, put a surveyor thing in the ground, and the gentleman did it. And it's just stuff like that.
Yeah.
I realized this could go forward. And so about 2000, we had, all during this, Project Impact came about, this FEMA initiative to build disaster-resistant communities. And Steve Lyons from the Weather Channel at the time came to Wilmington, and he asked me, is there a way we could ever put a camera out on a beach and send a signal back? And that was really the birth of it, because ever since then we tried, and we tried microwave, all kinds of things, and we failed. But by 2004, and we had developed a relationship with Sprint in 2001, the new 3G internet was coming around. The mobile broadband was just coming on to scene. And with our partnership with Lowe's and Sprint, we were able to afford and to fund new technology and new advances. And so by 2004, we were at least, and even as early as 2001, we were able to do stuff from the vehicle. We didn't have to go plug into a modem somewhere at a hotel or a gas station or a McDonald's.
Yeah.
And that really was a game changer. But by 2005, the network became strong enough with this 3G pretty much everywhere from Sprint, and the other carriers too, but specifically Sprint was our partner, that we were able to do it live, from the vehicle using a laptop and an encoder. And then we just decided, let's put all of that into a box, get it a giant battery to power it, and we can put these cameras out and see if it works.
And Katrina
was the first.
Yeah, was your and
trial
again,
by fire.
You see these videos. If you go onto the video, you see you hooking it up and basically kind of tying it to
we strapped it
a
down.
pole, and then B, finding it afterwards.
Trying.
Well, but you did find one, and one of the things that's so amazing to me in watching that video is when you found it and when you opened it, it almost, somebody who knows you almost looks like you're getting emotional to the point where you're like, I don't want to say ready to shed a tear, but this was was a major breakthrough for you, wasn't it?
It was, but it was also at the same time, hours later, a crushing defeat, because so to try to explain this, the way it was back then, we had a laptop that would digitize the camera feed from a bullet camera. Normally you put them in the corner of a building for security, and everything was tied down and anchored, and it would run into the case. And we had a daytime camera and a nighttime camera. And since Katrina was going to be in the day, we set everything up with daytime cameras. We had 3 of them at the time, all in Gulfport, Mississippi. Yeah. One was out on this place called Erie Pier facing a restaurant called the White Cap. And there's always gremlins and things that can go wrong. We knew that everything would also record onto a VCR, a super VHS VCR inside. Some people are going to say, what's a VCR?
What's VHS?
Right, and that would be 9 hours of tape, and it would be broadcast quality. And then it would also record a very low bit rate, what we were streaming onto the laptop, in what's called a Windows Media Video file.
Right.
And so we had to go get the boxes back. There was no storing it in the cloud back in this day. So 3 cameras were set up. All 3 were working in one form or another. The only one that anybody ever recorded anything from was the one in downtown Gulfport facing the post office, that a gentleman in Florida that ran another website called hurricanecity.com was watching it and recording it onto VHS tape himself. He does like a color commentary of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And so he recorded that one. The other 2 were in and out, and I figured, okay, we'll just go back and get them, and at least we've got the tape.
Sure.
If it wasn't working live, remember this is the first time we'd ever tried it, and it kind of half worked, it kind of half didn't. We got the tapes. So it's over. That afternoon we go down and try to find everything, and it's just completely annihilated. And we couldn't, nothing was where we left it. And we looked and looked and looked, and we had to give up that day. I came back, and I searched around, and there's people wandering around through the debris. And just right there, and it's interesting, I put it on the steps of the Baptist church, and I found it behind the alleyway of the Methodist church, for what it's worth. And it literally...
That's a great way to look at it. I hadn't figured that out yet.
It was just right there.
Yeah.
I'm just walking around, and I'm like, there it is.
Yeah. And it was a big camera. And for those of you who, it looked like a big suitcase on rollers, but it was a hard-plated camera.
Yes, it's a military spec case that people ship all kinds of stuff in. It's... so it was basically airtight. So it obviously ripped up, everything broke off, and then it floated. And when I opened it, there was another guy that was walking around. I said, "Hey, can you help me real quick? I want you to help me document this. This is huge."
Yeah.
And I couldn't get the handles open because they were salt and grime in there. I had to bang on it with a screwdriver.
Yeah.
And I opened it, and everything was completely intact. It wasn't disheveled. I couldn't believe my eyes.
That's when you can hear hear in your voice.
And I thought
relief and emotion. Yeah.
And I thought that I have done it.
Yeah.
And that this will change history.
Yeah.
And so I looked for the other ones, didn't find them, and I figured I got 1 out of 3, and I drove to Marianna, Florida, and checked into a Hampton Inn, hauled everything up there, plugged it into the TV to watch, and the tape was at the beginning, and I pressed play, and it does the little lines that old VHS tape would do, and it was blue. I'm like, well, that's weird, and long story short, it absolutely worked, but I had the wrong camera plugged into the input.
Yeah.
So it recorded blue screen from a dead camera for 9 hours.
Yeah.
While the laptop was streaming the correct camera, but the laptop had a short in its power supply.
Yeah.
And so it stopped recording at about an hour or so in. And it was just like,
yeah.
That's the closest I've ever come to literally having to go to therapy to deal with just complete failure.
Yeah.
Because it would have changed history to be able to see it, and that camera wouldn't have flinched until it was ripped up.
Yeah.
And so, ever since, we have worked on.
I was going to say, but I mean, you say failure in one thing, but I know you learned from that.
Absolutely.
And then, when was the first big success in your mind?
It only took about 3 years later, because hurricanes wax and wane, that we had Hurricane Ike, and we, through the financial support of through Lowe's and Sprint and everybody, and we started generating revenue from the website itself, selling subscriptions, because live video was expensive back then.
Oh, yeah.
We needed a way, it still is, to pay for it. So by 2008, we had Hurricanes Gustav and Ike, both Gulf Coast hurricanes, and Ike was the bigger of the two. And so we set up in Galveston, Texas, along the seawall, and one camera was over on the west end. And we learned very quickly about putting everything up much higher. Just real quick, the idea was these cases are so battle-hardened that I thought we could strap them down low and they're going to be airtight, so what, But it was over-engineered, overthought.
Yeah.
I should have thought about elevation, mitigation, duh.
Yeah.
So from Katrina on, we started putting the cases up high. And I actually got to go backwards. Just remember, this is a lot of history.
Yeah.
The biggest breakthrough was actually that season, 2005, was Wilma down in Naples. So we went down and set everything up, worked with Dan Summers in Collier County, and we put a camera system in Everglades City, and we put the box up high on this. Ironically enough, it was a Sprint central office. It's like a building with all these gadgets and wires in it. It's called a CO, or central office. We put the case up on the roof and attached the camera looking out over Everglades City, and it nailed it. About 6 feet of storm surge came in. We were able to see it live. It recorded under the VHS tape, and it was a complete success. So by the time we got to Ike, we were really good at it. We had tested in, a few things around here and on the Outer Banks ever since 2005 and Ike. We don't sit idle, that's for sure.
No.
And by the time we got to Ike, that was just a monumental success. We, again, put the camera system up on the balcony of a house. Everybody's evacuated, they're gone. And if we ever put it on a house and nobody knows it, we just tape it up and that's it. And come back and take it off. It never damages anything. But now through social media, we know who people are asking us to put it at their house.
Sure.
But it was incredible because we had this shot from Bermuda Beach that was just amazing. And the surge was coming in like 12 hours before the eye. Now, the worst of it happened at night. So even though our stuff worked, it got dark. It's like, my goodness, because we just wanted to see. But that's some of the best storm surge footage to really show what it's all about anywhere.
Yeah.
Because you can see these giant waves roll up. It almost looks like tsunami waves because it's so flat there that these huge waves hit and they just keep spreading out to the camera, and it goes underneath the house that we're on.
Yeah.
And you look, and it's, standard definition, old 4x3 video, but you look and you say, my goodness, there's like giant timbers and pieces of house and whatever else in there, and that stuff is what starts battering everything else. And if you don't evacuate, that's going to ram into your car, and that water's got motion, and we've just really learned a lot from it, and it is used by the National Hurricane Center when they go do their education work throughout the country. And it's funny because some of those guys have graduated school and they use my video and they're like, I didn't even know that was you.
Yeah,
that's how old it is now.
It is, but it's amazing. And do you look at what you've done so far as that major benefit, the benefit of showing people the dangers of what could happen if A, they're not prepared, B, they don't evacuate when told? I mean, people say, oh yeah, Mark's going out in the middle of this and he's going to be chasing. But you've done it again, and you've done this for the scientific reason behind it, right?
And more and more and more and more so. And the main thing is to help people understand the impacts, that they read and they hear about it. It's wind, rain, storm surge, and sometimes tornadoes. But what does that mean exactly? What does that look like? And again, those old films from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it just doesn't do it justice. And even from some of the storm chasers back in the day of some classic hurricanes, Elena, up on the Outer Banks, there was Emily in 1993. Handheld video is one thing, but a fixed camera where you can show the process for the entire duration really helps you understand what's happening, because it's not that dramatic, bam, waves coming up money shot that so many people think that's what a hurricane is. And it's not. It's a process that takes a while to build up. And so this has really helped, because, and then with the advent of the internet, as ubiquitous as it is, and social media, we can share this with an unlimited amount of people. And so for years, that's how we did it. It was big, bulky, laptop-based. We collected wind data, pressure data, and live video, and then doing these updates from the field. It was kind of like being the Weather Channel and a scientist and a teacher all wrapped up into one.
Yeah, and you do the updates. For those of you who don't know, it's hurricanetrack.com, and you do updates on YouTube, and you take, it's basically like an extended version of what Gannon and Eric and our meteorologists do on the air and online. You take every facet that plays into it.
I have time, right.
And because you do have the time. And I think that, do you enjoy that as much as you do being out in the elements?
I do, because I realize now how, so there's an interesting twist here. I do because I realize how many people are watching, but not for that reason that, oh, I'm famous or I've got viewers. Mm-hmm. It's because not only are they watching, but when they comment and they say, I understand this better now, and I get it is not an ego booster. Mm-hmm. It is just like a teacher who the students do really well and they go on to become something big. It's a sense of accomplishment, not, oh, wow, I had 10,000 views on that video today, or 25,000. That's great, of course, but that shows me I'm reaching people, but I'm also getting through to them, and that's more important. And so that's a huge motivator. Mm-hmm. And there's not much money in it, which we can eventually talk about, but that's not, of course you got to pay the bills, but that's not why I do it. And so then I know, and here's the difference. A lot of people do that. There's a lot of experts in hurricanes. Some are just weather geeks that know how to talk well and do a good presentation, and some are formally trained. I think of all of them, I'm probably the only one that'll do all of that, and then we go in the field. Mm-hmm. And there's that difference. And so it's just like the TV station here. You're going to hear your on-air meteorologist talk about it, and then WECT is going to go out and cover it locally. Yeah. And so I can do that anywhere in the United States, and that makes it more of okay, now it's the different phase. It's the field work phase. When's
the first time that somebody noticed that work that you did and said it made a difference? Whether it's somebody who saw your live feed and evacuated when they didn't want to, whether it's the Army Corps of Engineers, or do you remember a first aha time that you're like, okay, what I'm doing has made a difference?
The first one was pretty big, and it was really early in my career. It was in 1999 that I had produced these storm surge maps in cooperation with the Army Corps of Engineers and Project Impact. Now, the mapping data came from their hurricane evacuation study. I took it and turned it into a public consumable product, and then I developed all the graphics on the back. And we took state-of-the-art at the time. Now you can do it on your phone, and who knows what you'll be able to do with this next version.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
But at the time, we could take, instead of cartoons, 2D drawings or whatever, that's just storm surge. Take a real photo of a real place and add digital water. And it had the reflection, and it was that augmented reality. Back in 1999, mm-hmm. I did that, and it was on a Macintosh, and people know, oh yeah, of course. And it was so groundbreaking, and it really helped a lot of people understand storm surge, that even the real estate market, who originally was like, we don't want people knowing about this, loved it, because it educated their potential buyers that they are or are not in a surge zone, and if you are, here's what you can do about it.
Right.
And as a result of all of that, I won an award from FEMA in Washington, D.C., that it showed me that this made a difference. James Lee Witt and Dan Summers and all of us went up there, and it was amazing. And I knew that it was going to be the start of something big. And then there's the personal emails that I'll get that I watched your updates, I watched your warnings about this, that, or the other, and I evacuated and I came back, and my house was gone, and I would have died, so thank you. But really, as of late, things like Sandy that hit New Jersey and the Northeast hit a lot of people. But there was a little town up there, it's a borough they call them, called Belmar. Mm-hmm. And I was there in the Tahoe, out of my element completely, and this police captain comes over and, hey, saw all the stuff, and it's like, what are you doing? I told him, and he said, well, can you come back to City Hall and give us a briefing? We know nothing. We're just totally dead in the water. And I went back. I was like, where's your EOC? He's like, right there. And it was a gymnasium. And it had like, and Belmar's a wealthy community.
Yeah.
And they had like 6-foot tables and some laptops. You know, the EOC in New Hanover County and the EOC in Collier County are like these cathedrals to technology.
Yeah.
I'm like, where's your big screen so I can pull it? And this is it. I'm like, ee.
Yeah.
So we got together with the mayor and all these different people, and this guy's like, you know, so everybody, this is Mark Sudduth, and he's from North Carolina, and he's going to explain to us what to expect. And I used my iPhone, and I gave them the next 12 hours of their lives of what was going to happen. And the first thing I said, all of those people ready for swiftwater rescue, they don't need to be standing around drinking coffee. They need to be sleeping, because nothing is happening right now. It's going to happen when it makes landfall and the surge comes in. They need 4 hours of sleep. So as soon as I said that, the mayor's like, go to sleep. And then I just outlined everything else based on the discussion in the hurricane local statement. And everything I told them that was going to happen, happened. Mm-hmm. And the next day, I'm up like 30 miles away at the hotel, and the guy's calling me, begging me to come back to Belmar, because he says, we want you to meet the governor, because you saved us. And I'm just like, well, that's not true. I mean, come on, you know, your people saved you. He's like, no, your information, we had no idea they had to get rest like that. Everything you said was going to happen happened. I'm like, all right, sure. So he gave me a police escort out to the beach at Belmar. Wow. Chris Christie lands. All these people come out. He thanks the first responders, as he should, first. Yeah. And then he comes to me and the mayor, which his name's Matt Doherty.
There you
Carolina
go.
people, yeah.
That's a name you recognize.
Handsome devil, too, man. He is something else. Maybe he should run for president one day. I love Mr. Doherty. But he introduces me to the governor of New Jersey, and we talk for a second. He's wearing that fleece thing, right? And, you know, I'm wearing, like, shorts and whatever, because I'm from North Carolina. I'm like, it's 55 degrees. That's beach weather. We'll take it. Up there, they're like, whew.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, Governor, I said, this is the first time I've ever been to New Jersey for a hurricane. And he said in that accent, you know, well, no offense, Mark, but I hope we never see you again.
Yeah.
And so there you have it. And I realized from what the police captain said that my knowledge really helped them. And we've been in touch ever since.
Nice.
And have gone up for a couple of big nor'easters. And the borough administrator, who now is either retired, I don't know what he's doing, great guy. He calls whenever there's the smell of a hurricane coming, especially from New York, because they all have lots of ties up in Manhattan and lower Manhattan where Sandy really flooded. And then just, again, you know, the retiree that lives by herself that says, I understand what you're saying, and I really appreciate it. You know, and they'll say, I can't buy your wrap, I can't, you know, give you $1 here or there, but you made a difference. And I'm like, that's the kind of paycheck that I can sleep with and go to sleep knowing that I've made a difference.
Do you like the term storm chaser?
It doesn't apply to what I do, put it that way. I like the concept that there are storm chasers in general, because they do contribute a lot to the science and the awareness, the ones that are trained. Now, there are a lot of them that look at it as the Wild West, and they're big game hunting, except live animals, it's severe weather. And to each their own, but that's gotten wildly out of control in the Midwest. I went out a couple times, dipped my finger in it, and I'm like, not for me. Yeah. And the main reason, John, is because I couldn't figure out what I was ever going to contribute back to the science. Because there are people already doing that. And they're doing very well with Doppler on Wheels programs, putting out these pods, these sensors at ground level to measure wind speed and pressure and other things. And I thought, they're already doing it. I'll just be getting it in the way. Yeah. You know, when I'm retired someday, I can take the wife out and we go tornado hunting in Nebraska or something. She'll love that.
What's the most scared you've been on one of these?
Yes. The most scared ever would be Charlie. Hurricane Charlie in 2004, where we sat in that vehicle and now we did some smart things, but it was still very scary. I mean, and there's no reason to even try to pretend. That doesn't help. But it was a Category 4 direct hit, a very small, well-compacted eye and eye wall, and we were right there in Charlotte Harbor, and we were just out in front of the overpass to collect all the data. But once it really started getting bad, we moved just under to use the embankment to protect us from everything coming that way. And even with that, I felt like that, you know, you're on your flight from Charlotte to Phoenix or to Vegas for a vacation or whatever, and everything's fine, and they come on, well, there might be some turbulence, and you go into a thunderstorm. I've never personally experienced it, but this is what it would have to be like. That feeling that I'm going to die.
Really?
And
You
I am
had that feeling?
completely out of control.
Yeah.
Where, and I, you know, we've all, if you've flown, you've experienced turbulence, and it gives you that,
Oh, it does.
So for 30 to 45 minutes, it's literally like that.
Shaking the Yukon that badly.
Yes, it's like really where there are no more choices that I can make. It's completely up to the forces of nature and physics as to whether or not we get hurt. I never really feared for my life, but I felt like this is beyond my control now.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot do anything to change the outcome except stay. Obviously, you can stay in the truck, for goodness sakes.
Right.
A few people that were around that had no clue there was a hurricane coming, they told us that. They were ready to get out and run up under the overpass, under the girders. I was like, no, you need to stay in your car. Because the littlest things, rocks and pieces of sticks, can impale you. And they didn't understand.
So if that's how you felt, you're married with children, how does your wife and how do the kids take your, and I'm going to use the term adventures, but your
Right.
work, how do they take that? Because obviously it's one thing for you to be out there,
Right.
but it's another thing for them to be here or evacuate here and go somewhere
Right.
else to be worried about you.
Well, we'll start with the children. More than anything, they miss me, because Dad's not around. They don't fully understand it yet. My older boys do that are in college, and they've just been through it enough that they know, well, Dad knows what he's doing. He's made it through this many.
Right.
But I tell them that the most dangerous thing, what you really need to be worried about, is just me driving there and driving back. That's something out of control. That's because in the hurricane, generally I can control my destiny. Mm-hmm. Make choices to either be somewhere or not be somewhere where the worst is happening. It's up to me, 90% of it. But driving down there, all it takes is one person falling asleep at the wheel and it's lights out, literally. Mm-hmm. And that has happened to a few people that were doing nothing recklessly at all on the way back from a tornado chase where somebody drifted in their lane and hit them head on. A young man a couple of years ago. A deer, a blown tire, doesn't matter.
But your wife, now the kids, they understand Dad's working, but
Yeah.
how about your wife? She's been with you a long time and had been with you through all of this journey.
She knew, right, even at the beginning.
Yeah.
So she works in the emergency department, and so she knows about adrenaline and that moment. But it's interesting because it doesn't really, like the whole concept of a hurricane, unless like roofs are blowing off. And so when you're in the emergency department, I guess is the way I have to reconcile it. And somebody comes in and they have had their insides blown out.
Yeah.
And she's able to maintain calm and deal with that, where I would be out cold and you'd have to help me because I'm out done.
Yeah.
A hurricane, unless it's just destroying everything, is not going to impress her. And I've struggled to understand that. Somebody comes, so it's the difference. Me going into a tropical storm, it's like, okay, it's something to be out in, and it's not that big of a deal. Where somebody comes in and says, I accidentally cut off part of my finger. To that person, it's the end of the world. To her, it's a slightly amputated finger. We can deal with that. But she can also deal with the gunshot wound that comes in that's so graphic we can't even talk about it.
Yeah.
And
so she's knowledgeable enough to know that you're going to make good decisions.
Exactly. And you summed it up perfectly.
Yeah.
And I think that her experience and her whatever, because there's no way that I would ever, if God himself could say, you are now a trained surgeon, I wouldn't do it. Because I would be like, oh. But yet 2 of my sons are going into medicine, so where did that come from?
Yeah,
but she has
obviously.
no interest. The eclipse was like, whatever. Sun's going to disappear for 2 minutes. A hurricane, is our house in danger? Nope. All right, well, just be careful. But she's not flippant.
Right.
It's just like, hey, he's got it.
She's been doing it she's been along you for long enough. Let's talk about Harvey and Irma, because, it literally could be, by the time this season is over, we could have experienced 2 of the most costly hurricanes, most powerful hurricanes in the history of this country.
Yes.
Back to back.
Back to back. And
you were in both. You
Right.
you drove down to Houston area or down to the Texas area, and then came back and then went down to Irma.
Right.
Your travels. I watched a little bit of the the videos you sent back. But your thoughts on the powerful storms that we've just experienced.
First of all, they're not that unusual And if we go back and look at history, we can see that there were more powerful ones, except for Irma, where it had happened. And we'll talk about that. But so we just haven't had anything like that in 12 years, roughly 12 years. And the amount of flooding and the rain that Harvey brought was exceptional. But there have been incidences in the past where we've had tremendous rain events, but they're so spread out that most people look at it as, well, this has never happened before.
Right.
It must be climate change or something else. And maybe there's a little bit of that baked in. But the immensity of Houston, as an example, 4 million people, and then the rest of the Texas coast that it affected. And just for me to realize that I was in a city that recorded 52 inches of rainfall in a few days' time. 52 inches. That's you don't even, when you hear that much snow somewhere, you're aghast. You're like, wow. Yeah. Buffalo, New York, 52 inches of snow. Yeah, that's impressive. This is liquid that fell from the sky. And all that rain on that bayou system there, the swamp that it's built on, basically, just couldn't handle it. And what happened after that, and the disaster in slow motion. Yet there was parts of Houston where it didn't even faze them. And I would literally go over, the Addicks Dam ran right behind my hotel on Interstate 10. It looks like a boomerang shape. And so it's not like the Hoover Dam or anything like that. It's difficult to explain to people. Behind that dam, somehow they allow people to build neighborhoods. Now that's a story for another day. And as the dam fills up to protect the metropolitan Houston area, the reservoir as they call it, the houses flood. And so everybody's coming over that dam. It's an earthen levee, basically. And this street area called West Park Row of businesses and energy clients and whatever, and hotels. So I'm at my hotel, and then just a mile down the road on the other side of the dam and the reservoir, it's the end of the world for those people. Their lives are turned upside down. It was like walking through a wormhole into a different dimension of chaos, sadness, fear, loss, anxiety, rescue. Honestly, John, it was the most bizarre sensation that I'm going to leave my Hampton Inn, drive down the street, and it's like walking onto the set of the next Steven Spielberg blockbuster or
walking
Dunkirk
to the
or
Ninth
something.
Ward down there in New Orleans.
And it's like literally when you walk over the dike, somebody goes, and action! And the helicopters are flying over and people are coming out with all their worldly possessions. And I'm there to put up a camera on the intersection to document the whole thing and to show it live and just kind of watch. And some science can be gleaned from that, but just to be able to be a fly on the wall, and we can run time lapse and see how things flowed and did what have you, but people appreciated being able to just, I'm leaving, where can I see this? And then you go to hurricanetrack.com and it's available there.
They can at least watch what their neighborhood
That's
is
right.
like. So then you're in Houston. How long were you there?
10 days or so.
Okay, and then you come back here and spent, about a day and a half?
Yeah, it seems like it. Just only a few short days.
And then all of a sudden you have to go down to Irma, which, again, like you said, for a long time we thought it was coming this way.
Oh, I was worried. I'm going to tell you, that is the most worried I have ever been.
Really?
Absolutely. There was a few times there when it looked like it was going to come up the coast, the center, the core, and it looked like it could come in here as a solid 3 with an enormous wind field. And I knew, like Myrtle Beach, Oak Island, all of our Brunswick beaches, Wrightsville would see a surge that we hadn't seen since Hazel. And then the wind damage on top of that. And then all the people that have moved here since '99 that have zero hurricane experience. And then the fact that, well, that's just the hurricane itself. And traffic in Wilmington when it rains is bad enough. You bring a Category 3 hurricane in here, just the misery of it. It was, a lot of people say they see me out and they, oh man, you must be glad it's coming here because you don't have to go very far. They couldn't be any wrong.
I've got a house here, sir. I mean,
absolutely.
I'm invested in that one probably a little more than any other one.
I don't want my kids going to school in July, too, because they're all excited. Oh, we got to school, and realize they're going to make those days up, and the power's out. It's miserable.
When did you decide then to go to Florida?
Once, because I didn't know for sure that it wasn't going to hit North Carolina. So my family, we all agreed, I'll leave on Thursday for Florida, and we'll have stuff ready back home. They'll go to Greensboro if necessary, and it was just this waiting game. And so I left for Florida, assuming that it would kind of come up and maybe touch Miami and West Palm and then come off and make its way up either Savannah, Charleston, Myrtle Beach, or Wilmington. But then that ridge of high pressure just kind of expanded a little more.
And dug in a little more.
And pushed
kept
it more to the west. And so it's not a giant course change. It's just a shift over to the west enough so when it did turn north, it kept Wilmington from the worst.
What did you learn science-wise from that storm in Florida when you put your devices in? What did you learn there?
We got some great weather data, the meteorological data, the wind data, the pressure data. It fed live from Marathon Key. And everything that we do live is archived now in the cloud, on the internet. So if something happens and that's cut off, we have everything up to that moment. Video, data, it's all there. The data continues to record on this tiny little computer called a Raspberry Pi. It's a little small, little Linux-based device. We don't use laptops anymore. Everything's now microprocessor, micro SD card,
Sure.
And we can store days and days and days of data. Live video will get cut off when the LTE network goes down, the infrastructure, and there is no archive of that right now, but we have decided to come up with a way to do that, story for another day. But the data keeps being collected. It's probably still being collected even as we speak, because that thing will just run forever on these smaller lithium batteries that we use. So we know that we collected valuable meteorological data, and we know that we collected some storm surge data through the video. And so while the public was watching it, while the Weather Channel was showing it, we all got to see what was going on, and we, wow, and people appreciated it and they understood it. But now the scientific value being pulled out of it to see how fast that storm surge came up, different things, just looking at time lapse of how the water moves, how much stuff's in the water. You set the time at the beginning, you know what it was at the end, and you can, again, the timing. There's so much to discover from moving video, we call it photogrammetry, that, I'm going to put it out there and have people look at it and say, what do you see? Crowdsourcing the data. They did this with the SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where you could put a program on your computer and run through all of that data that they were bringing in from those radios and see if you were the one that heard an ET phone. Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to start doing the same thing with our video. I'm going to put the whole thing out there. You can relive it from start to finish and see if you see something that's unusual or different that might help. Who knows? That's the beauty of it now, is it can be shared with the world.
And now that social media is out there, are you going to continue to put the documentaries together of the stuff that you gather?
And I did that last year, put together a 16 version. We call the documentary Tracking the Hurricanes. It's like the series. And I actually went back, because I hadn't done one since '08. Didn't have enough material, really. I could have made one on Sandy by itself, but for whatever reason I didn't.
Right.
So I did it in a two-part series, from '09 through 15, and kind of bringing you up to speed on all the technology. And then 16 was by itself. And I put it on YouTube, and far more people will watch it on YouTube than would buy a DVD. And that's fine. I won't make as much money, but again, the money's going to come from other sources. It's never going to make me wealthy, and that's never the point. As long as I can pay the bills and afford to do it, that's fine. But I want people to be able to see it, because it's a story, it's history. Mm-hmm. And I'll do the same thing for 2017, which we are only halfway.
Yeah, I know.
Who knows how that story's going to end.
The sad part is that we're still having several more months. What is the Patreon? It's on your website. So it's got a prominent spot on your website. I want to ask you about that, because frankly, I don't understand it, and I wanted you to explain it to me.
So in the old days, we had corporate sponsors or partners, much more of a partnership. And so I would be paid like a consultant, but I would also have project needs, and they would fund that. And Lowe's did that, and Sprint did that. They were the biggest. Mm-hmm. With the economy collapsing and the hurricanes kind of going away at the same time, those came to an end. We were just lines on spreadsheets. Nothing personal, it's just business. So since then, and especially with the advent of the internet like we know it now, this idea of crowdfunding, a few dollars from a lot of people. We have PayPal where people can send in a contribution.
Sure.
Man, I'm going to give you $10 for your gas or something. And some people will send a $500, PayPal. They really appreciate what we're doing. But Patreon is a crowdfunding idea where you can be a patron of something you want to support. So just like public radio has members on an annual basis and at different levels, Patreon gives the general public a way to do that with any of these creators, is what they're called.
Gotcha.
And so you can pledge $1. I'm going to give you $1 a month because I like what you're doing. And if, depending on what you do, what if 10,000 people dig that? You're pulling in 10 grand a month to support your passion. So now it's a way for people to develop. You know how they say, follow your dreams.
Sure.
And some people, they don't have any idea what they want to go to college for. And that gives them a way to do it. Maybe they're a musician, maybe they are an artist, and sometimes the two obviously blend. Maybe they're trying to create something. It's not Kickstarter. You're not trying to fund a future idea. It's, hey, I'm a blogger, I'm a this or a that or not, whatever. And people can dig it or not.
Yeah.
And it's growing.
Yeah.
We want it to grow more because that's a sustaining thing, because I need to be able to be around and available from a financial perspective when there are no hurricanes.
Yeah.
It's just like, and here's the deal, and we'll use everybody around here can relate to this. The fire last year at Carolina Beach, had it destroyed Britt's Donuts, that would have been horrible for Britt's. So we all want Britt's Donuts to be around every summer, right?
Sure.
And so they use the summer because they don't sell them in the winter. And so the hotels, Britt's Donuts is an example, that's a humorous example. They have the season and they don't need any interruptions, whether it's hurricanes or anything else. And they do well, and then they survive in the off season. And that cycle goes on and on and on.
Well, how much go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
For me, if there are no hurricanes, and this is just the way it is.
Right.
I'm forgotten about, except, there's the hurricane guy.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it goes.
How much does it cost? You mentioned earlier that I mean, and let's face it, you got to pay the bills. The equipment costs money. You got to put gas in the SUV. You got to do all that. How much does it cost on a weekly, monthly incident basis?
Something big like Harvey and Irma can be $2,000 or $3,000 for us to tackle it. And while people say, well, that's a lot of money, and now you think about what it takes for the Weather Channel to cover something, it is a drop in the bucket. And we do work with the Weather Channel, and but they send out an entire crew, sat truck time, hotels for everybody, gasoline, and that logistics must be unbelievable in and of itself, but it's extremely costly too. For us, literally $2,000 or $3,000 per event, but that's just what we're doing now, the bare bones. I would like to be able to get up to where we have a budget of about 10 grand per mission, not to put money in my pocket, but to hire people on the back end to make things happen. Keep that website updated, blogs coming out. We have some people that are volunteering right now. They're helping me out, and I might be able to send them $50 or $100, but they need to be paid. And I'm not talking about just a guy who, I love hurricanes, but meteorologists that maybe have gotten out of the business.
You have meteorologists that help you, right?
Yeah, this gentleman, a little bit younger than me in New Orleans, named Zach Fradella. And he used to work as a meteorologist in Lake Charles, got out of it. It wasn't for him.
Right.
And he's trying to do something else in the weather world, and he's great. He's got the presence. We get a lot of comments that he's easy on the eyes, and that helps.
Yeah, that does
But
help.
he's also got a great delivery. He knows the content. He's got a big following. And so there's that connection. And, we have an arrangement, and, it's a very simple arrangement, and it's agreeable to both of us knowing what my budget is. But wouldn't it be great to be able to hire him full-time, so to speak, and expand on that? And it just makes it more incentivizing to know you're getting paid what you're worth.
Right.
He went to school, he's got a degree in meteorology, and we could really team up. And there's other people on the back end that can handle stuff like watching where I am and changing labels that are going to show up in the app or on the website so that I don't have to waste time doing that.
Yeah.
And there's a guy in New York City that was doing that for me. But I want to be able to pay these people. It's wonderful what they're doing, but at the end of the day, I need to make a living doing it, but I also want to be able to pay the people that help me.
Yeah.
And we could grow it into something phenomenal.
As I was doing some of the research, and of course, like I said, we've known each other for better part of 2 decades now, but as I was doing some research, an interesting thing that came across is you said, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the questions you're asked the most when you talk to groups, especially kids,
right,
is why can't they put something and drop something into a hurricane to get it to stop,
right,
to lower the pressure, to lower the strength? I find that a fascinating question, but you get ask that an awful lot, don't you?
I do, especially from kids.
Yeah.
And the scientists at HRD, the Hurricane Research Division, people actually pitch them ideas. So the first thing is that hurricanes are a necessary part of balancing the heat on the earth. It's not necessarily that they take heat out of the tropics, but they have a role, and it's very complex. And if you mess with that, Dr. Neil Frank, one of the first directors of the Hurricane Center, classic guy, he had a phrase in a documentary one time that I will never forget, and that is, if we didn't have hurricanes, we'd probably have something worse. And so that being said, first of all, you don't really want to mess with them because they do serve a purpose. And if you mess that up, which I don't think we can, but it's just too much energy that you're dealing with. The only viable solution that I could think of that would work is to somehow upwell a bunch of cold water in its path to sap the energy and bring the category down and the surge down, but still bring the rain in if it's needed somewhere. Or some people have proposed dragging a big iceberg in front of it. That's a little bit, but the upwelling of the colder water would work because it absolutely derives its energy from that warm water. And when they stall over the ocean, they'll upwell that water. And as long as the ocean heat content isn't too high, like in the middle of the Caribbean, it wouldn't be possible because it's just more warm water, like 500 meters down. But like off our coast, if one's coming up, you know, if you had the technology, but how much would that cost? And what if it turns off in this direction because you weakened it, and now the lower levels steer it, and you're like, oh boy, and then it dumps 40 inches of rain on Jacksonville, Florida. They're going to be kind of mad at you. So just leave it alone, adapt, mitigate, build on the beach. And I really believe that. Build on the beach, but build smart. And now, there are people like Bill Reed, the former director of the Hurricane Center. He says, well, we build back bigger and better, but then the hurricanes keep getting bigger. Well, they only can get big to a point. I get what he's saying, but, you know, there's only so much energy that they can expend, honestly. And it is possible to mitigate against most of their effects, even building right on the ocean front, you know, where your houses are dug in properly with the proper elevation and all of your essentials. It can wash out the bottom. And in fact, in Mississippi, when you drive down there, there's all these houses that are now built up, and some of them are 20 feet above the road and the yard. And, you know, it's fun bringing the summer groceries up there that way and whatever. You get your workout, but when they get another Katrina, it may not be nearly as bad for them. But then they build Waffle Houses right back where they were on the ground level, so go figure.
Do you carry memories along on the job? And the reason I ask is when I went down to Biloxi and New Orleans 6 months after Katrina, because people had evacuated here, and several groups here went down to help afterwards, church groups that we followed. I still take to this day some of the memories that I saw in Biloxi, and the houses with numbers circled because that's how many dead bodies they'd found inside, and the odor that you smelled even 6 months later. I use that as a way of telling people, look, if you don't get prepared, this could happen to you and your neighborhood. Do you carry those kind of memories along with you as kind of an impetus to do the job?
I do, and the one that sticks out the most, you know, it's nice to meet the governor no matter what state or political affiliation he's with, right? That's all neat. It's nice to get an award from FEMA. But what sticks out from all of my experiences was after Katrina in Biloxi on the Back Bay, and this is on the documentary from '05, was this child. His name was Trevor. And I'm interviewing his family and talking to them, and he's wearing like long johns, and they're soaking wet. And hey, how y'all doing? And the house looked fine. And they're like, oh, it was terrible. I've never prayed so much in my life. And I went in and I said, well, where's the watermark? And they're like, it's right there. And I was just like,
yeah, I remember halfway up the stairs.
85 inches inside the house. Yeah. And I look at this kid, and he's 6 years old, and he's wearing wet long johns, and that's all he's got. And he just survived something that will change him forever. And the stress that he had to go through after I left, I'm sure. And, he's an adult now, probably getting ready for college. And so just knowing what that child went through and how many other children, and I guess it's because I have children, that really hit home for me, that the parents need to make the right decision to save these children, first of all. It's just the same thing like leaving them in a hot car, doing the seatbelt, etc.
Sure.
And I just never forgot that. I'm like, well, maybe that kid will grow up to be the next Jim Cantori or Mark Sudduth or Neil Frank or whomever. But maybe it'll scar him for life and he'll leave the coast.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be interesting to follow up. But to know that that child went through something that was so frightening for him, and it could have been preventable had his family really understood, because they had no idea they should have evacuated, and the water rose 85 inches. And that wasn't that wasn't forecast. That's exactly what was forecast.
Yeah.
But they didn't see the Gulf of Mexico. They just saw the Back Bay, and maybe even a little, well, Camille didn't flood anybody here. We'll be fine. And I'm telling you, John, just something about watching children and their faces. Some of them are excited, and they're like, wow, this is an adventure. But a lot of them, they're scared. And that hits home. It really does, because I realize we can do something about that.
Yeah, and in the end, with everything that you've done, and with as many storms as you've gotten into, and the hundreds of thousands of miles that you put on the SUV.
Right.
In the
Literally.
end, what do you want your contribution to be in this effort, in this, I'll call it a mission, because I believe you treat it as a mission.
Certainly.
Not just a job. I think this is your mission. What do you want your contribution to be? When people say, Mark did this, what do you want that to be?
That people are less afraid of hurricanes because they understand them better, because of what I have shown them, and then therefore they will respond better. Because we fear what we don't understand. And that is the biggest impediment. And it works if we think about it like our health. A lot of people will ignore things, and I don't want to deal with it. And they don't want to go to the doctor because they fear what the result is going to be. And in a lot of cases, it may be nothing, that if you had gone early and whatever, it could have been detected and cured, whatever the case might be. And so we do this a lot in our lives. We don't understand something because we're afraid of it. And the fear causes you to do things that lead to errors and make decisions that are just not correct. And so really getting people to understand, and just as an example, when people say, I hear them talking, like the other day before I left for Irma, I could literally hear people in Walmart. I was in stocking up on some water, either for my trip or my family, depended on which was going to happen, right? And you could just hear people, yeah, I heard that it's not supposed to come here. And again, it's just little things like, they are talking about the eye. But what I knew, I was like, they have no idea that if the eye comes in Myrtle Beach, Wilmington will have major damage, trees will be down, the power is going to be out for probably a month. And I just knew they have no clue, and they're panic buying, and they're doing whatever because they don't understand what they're up against. Mm-hmm. And I almost wanted to pull them aside and be like some weirdo in Walmart, right? Let me tell you what it's all about, man. Yeah. Just that little thing when people say, is it going to come here? What do you mean by it, you know? And so really getting people to not be so afraid and consumed by it, but embrace it as a part of living along the coast. And if you respond properly and in control, you're not always going to save your property, but you can save your life every single time.
HurricaneTrack.com, now 18 years old, and you've been chasing storms for a lot longer. You've given me a lot of your time today, and I know because it's hurricane season and you just got back from Florida that your time with your family is valuable. Mark, thanks. I appreciate you taking the time today, and thanks for your missions into a better education of the people, not only here, but all across the Southeast.
Well, it's an honor and a privilege. I appreciate the interview very much. And, just everybody hang in there. Like I said, hurricanes are part of living in North Carolina specifically and anywhere they are. So just be prepared. Thanks,
Mark.
John.
As you heard in our conversation, I've known Mark Sudduth now for almost 25 years. I've seen him capture video, amazing video, from some of the strongest storms that have ever hit the United States. Thanks to the internet and social media, people all around the world can now see his work and learn how to be better prepared in case of a hurricane. That's a pretty good legacy to leave behind. You can check out Mark's work right now by going to HurricaneTrack.com. If you know someone who you think would be a good interview for an upcoming episode of the podcast, please send me an email, jevans@wect.com. And if you like what you've heard in this episode, well, please leave a rating or a review. That helps us bring in even more listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks for joining us for this episode of One on One.